if I could follow a plant-based diet, and if that diet were meeting all my nutritional needs, if I could be abundantly healthy eating that way, if all the food I ate were satiating and satisfying and taste good, if that was part of a sustainable food production system, and if no animals actually died in the production of all that food, I mean, I would love to follow a plant-based diet.
That's a whole lot of ifs in there.
Exactly. We know that all those things are fantasies, right? I mean, just none of that is the reality of the world that we live in today.
Well,
so
even the quality, and I didn't mean to interrupt, Kat, but even the quality of the amino acids in so-called plant-based proteins, they're nowhere near what you get in an animal-based food, which has complete proteins. Any animal-based food, an egg, red meat, chicken, you name it, all of them have the complete profile of the amino acids. Now, that's not by accident. Whereas with plant-based, you can get a lot of them, but you have to eat a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I remember asking Dr. Will Cole, who wrote the Ketotarian book, where it's mostly plant-based, but he even recommends fish and eggs because they have those complete amino acids in there. And so, and I asked him, I said, is it possible for you to get the complete amino acid profile in your diet? And he said, yeah, but it's really hard. You would have to like hunt down different, like a wide variety of sources of plant-based. And even then, it's the bioavailability of that amino acid at that point. There's just too many like moving parts to say that a plant-based protein is going to be anything but far inferior to an animal-based one.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, in a lot of ways, I see veganism, vegetarianism as this highly unrealistic, highly idealistic attempt to achieve essentially heaven on earth now. But that's just not the world we live in. It's not sustainable. It's not healthy. Animals are still dying, even when you're eating a plant-based diet. We know that.
Yes. Yes, there's been several documentaries, the different low-carb documentaries that have come out that have like pointed that out. It's like, all right, you like your plants, you know there's a bunch of dead animals that make that plant because the pesticides kill off a lot of animals, and then you need dead animals to use as fertilizer in the ground to help grow those sacred plants. And, you know, look, if you eat plants, it's all good. Just don't only eat plants is what we're saying, because I think a mixed diet is probably pretty healthy for a lot of people. Yeah. Some of us need to do more animal than plant, but I think people can probably figure it out on their own through trial and error.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of people ask me, Jimmy, how do you get such good deep sleep? Well, there's a lot of things that I do, but one of the newest things that I recently added is this upgraded magnesium from a company called Upgraded Formulas. Go to their website, upgradedformulas.com, and you can learn all about this nano technology that they use for this particular mineral of magnesium. Again, it's called Upgraded Magnesium, and it's got all the different forms of magnesium in it, using the nanotechnology so it gets absorbed a lot better. Guys, I have seen my deep sleep improve by as much as 30 to 40% simply by adding in this product along with sunshine exposure, darkness in the room, cooler temperature, all of the things that I always have done. So again, upgradedformulas.com is the website. Go check them out.
My husband grew up on a ranch, and he talks about how when the harvesters come out, the vultures swarm around it because they know what's coming. The world we live in is just, the reality is that there is death in order that there is life. I mean, even Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, I think, is an example of that. So, so that's the world we live in. That's reality. Something else that I think people will use is this commandment in the Bible, thou shalt not kill. Pretty obvious that Bible never intended for that to apply to animals.
Humans.
People.
Right. Yeah. Humans. That's what he's talking about.
Yes, humans. The Bible's pretty clear. People were made in the image of God, animals were not. But I do think that the Bible also makes it clear that humans were meant to have dominion over the earth. We were meant to be stewards of the earth. And I think there is a lot we can learn there about caring about how animals are raised, though. There's examples all throughout the Bible. A lot of the Old Testament laws that were given to the Israelites were about how to take care of their animals.
Yes.
Jesus says you can work on the Sabbath if it's to help out a distressed animal. Simeon and Levi, two of Joseph's brothers, were cursed for abusing farm animals. So you know, we look at how a lot of animals are raised now, chickens who that they don't even have enough space to move around. They have to cut off their beaks so that they don't cannibalize each other, and cows that are given antibiotics their whole life just so that they can survive.
Right.
You know, and of course, it's so much healthier for us too when we do care about how those animals are raised.
I think we can all agree, vegans, keto, carnivore people, paleo people, all can agree alike. Factory farming has ruined the health of a lot of people. Is factory farmed meat better than highly processed grains and sugars? Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's not the point. The point is we should be demanding, by voting with our dollars, going and buying a quarter of a cow like Kat did, having backyard chickens and visiting the farmer's market like Jimmy does. Like, there's little things you can do to convince yourself and to basically convince the world, hey, we don't want that crap anymore. Give us the better quality. I'm organizing a 50th birthday party for myself. And one of the menu items they had was grass-fed beef sliders. I was like, whoa, like even they get it that people want some quality. I put it on the menu, by the way. So, duh, they're going to put it there. I want to reward them for honoring people that want that kind of thing.
Yeah, very cool. It's awesome to see people getting more and more on board with that. So here's another example, and this one I think is actually funny when you understand how this one is misinterpreted. So the book of Daniel, Daniel, you know, him and his friends, they're taken exile to Babylon. They're sent to work in the King Nebuchadnezzar's court, and as part of that, they're given all the king's food. They refuse to eat the king's food. So Daniel 10:3, people use this verse. It says, Daniel, he says, I ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for 3 full weeks. And he, of course, stayed healthy. He was successful. And so people will use that to say, hey, look, he didn't eat meat. This was great for him. But let's go back to the beginning of the book, Daniel 1, and it explains why they were not eating meat, why they were eating this way. So it says, Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. So the issue with the meat in the king's food was that probably 2 things. One, it probably wasn't prepared according to their Old Testament, the
Right.
Israelites' dietary law, and it also might have been sacrificed to these pagan gods. So therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs, the people who were over him, to allow him to not defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink, for why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So the eunuch is concerned. He's like, hey, you're not going to be eating meat. You're not going to be healthy. You're not going to be strong, right? That's what everyone's expecting. Then Daniel said to the steward over him and his friends, test your servant for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with us according to what you see. So they do that. They let him eat nothing but vegetables and water. And at the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. Okay, so people will look at that and say, well, look, they ate vegetables. They didn't eat meat. They were great. But here's the point of this story. The book of Daniel is not a story about how Daniel and his friends made good dietary choices. It is a story about how, because they were honoring God, God intervened supernaturally and spared them and used them as an example of his providence in their life, right? So we know later on in the book of Daniel, Daniel and his friends are spared from a den of lions. They're spared from a fiery furnace. And this is the exact same thing. They were spared from a plant-based diet, essentially. And
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I believe, were the 3.
Those other ones.
Yeah.
So this is a story about how God supernaturally intervenes into things that should be hurting them in order to display himself to this pagan nation and in order to bless these people who were honoring him. So you read this and it actually just seems crazy that people would use this to try to justify a plant-based diet, because it's pretty much saying the opposite, right?
Well, you can cherry pick Bible verses, and a lot of people do, well-meaning Christians do, because when you're trying to make a point, it's easier to only give a short little context than the whole context of the passage. And we see that not just in the Bible, but with lots of things in life. You hear one little thing or see one little clip out of context, and then people are like up in arms, but then you see the whole context and you go, oh wow, that's nothing like what the short little clip, the one little verse was saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So have you heard of Daniel fasts? People will do these.
Yes, of course.
Fasts.
Yeah. There
Yeah.
was a very popular book. There was a very popular book about that a couple years back.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've seen the website. I've known some people who've done it. But it just seems funny to me because that's not the point when you really understand.
Yeah, but again, that's taking out of context one little verse, one little so trust me. And I remember I used to work in Christian bookstores back in the 90s, and there was this guy named Dr. Don Colbert. And I remember the books because people, oh, I need the Colbert diet. Talks about eating vegetarian for Bible, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, okay. So one day I was flipping through it, and I wasn't anything. I was a junk food eater at the time. So this was in the 90s. And I'm looking at this book and I'm going, I'm hungry. Like I'm looking at, I would get hungry. Like even then I could never do that. But the justification, well, that's what the Bible says. Well, guess what? Mr. Colbert, Dr. Colbert has now gone keto. He now embraces a ketogenic diet. He wrote a ketogenic diet. And here was the fun part. Somebody pointed this out to me. They're like, do you know Dr. Don Colbert? And I'm like, that sounds familiar. He wrote a book about the Bible justifying veganism. Oh, yeah, I remember that guy. He's now keto, and he credits your book, Keto Clarity, changing his mind somewhat about it. I was like, say what? Like, how cool is that for like full circle?
That's awesome. Yeah, that book, by the way, was one of the first things I read when I went keto and was really helpful to me too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about the Old Testament? There you go. There you go. Yep. That was super helpful for me. Love that book. The Old Testament dietary laws. These are really interesting too. So in the Old Testament, in Leviticus, God gives the Israelites this long list of laws about how they're supposed to live. And some people now will say, oh, these were just random rules meant to test people. It was supposed to, show them that they couldn't be righteous on their own. But it was so much more than that. All of these laws were given to people for the purpose of making their lives better, to bless them, so that they would be a nation that people could look at and say, this nation is blessed by God. So we aren't held to these laws anymore. That's really clear in the New Testament. But I still think there's so much we can learn from them about what is good for us and what's not. So Leviticus 11 outlines how the Israelites were supposed to eat. And it all has to do with what animals you are and are not supposed to eat. So, it says you're not supposed to eat carnivores. It says you're not supposed to eat animals that are like bottom feeders, scavengers, things like that. But then it goes into this explanation of how you may eat animals with a divided hoof and that chews the cud. It seems kind of random. But when we look at that, what that's doing is it is distinguishing ruminants from non-ruminants.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then it, goes on to say, a camel has a divided hoof, but it doesn't chew the cud, so don't eat that. A rabbit eats grass, but it has a paw, so don't eat that. I mean, it seems kind of random, but what this was describing at the time was that ruminants, these animals with multiple stomachs, they eat grass that's not very nutritious food, and they can turn it into something that is very nutritious.
Yes.
And they're very good processors of what they eat. And oh, by the way, their fat is probably the best in terms of high quality fat, right? Least omega-6, most saturated fat. So how interesting is it that the Bible goes to all this work to distinguish ruminants? How easy would it have been to say, well, by the way, if you're not aware of this, ruminants are red meat, right? Deer, beef, sheep, goats, things like that. Red meat, that is red meat. How easy would it have been for the Bible to say, okay, all this red meat, all these ruminants, don't eat this. Or even don't eat animals. And it doesn't say that. It says eat these.
And I think that's one of the reasons why on Noah's Ark we saved the animals, because we would need them to feed the population. It's not really talked about within the context of the Bible, but a lot of biblical scholars talk about that what if all the animals had perished in the flood with all the humans? It's like the earth would have never survived. So
that's a really good point. Yeah.
Yes. So, and one of the things that clouds this discussion too, Kat, which fascinating, by the way, you've done your homework. Thank you for bringing it today. But one of the things that clouds this is the whole concept of unclean animals. And you kind of alluded to it there just a moment ago. And a lot of the sacrificial animals, well, you had a sacrificial lamb and they'd pour the blood over the door